you doing? My name is Donnie Baltazar. I'm a brown belt under Rodrigo Medeiros here in sunny San Diego. I'm here to show you attacks from the turtle, more specifically the Peruvian necktie system. So we're going to be starting with our opponent in side-to-side control. Well, our immediate goal is to get to a turtle control position where I can control him from that position, he can't escape, and I can initiate attacks. For that to happen, one of the more preferred positions of control I'm looking for is a modified 100 kilos. In a standard 100 kilos, his arm will be on the outside of my body as I get this cross face, and my outside hand would be blocking his hip. My feet would be kicked out so I can put the majority of my weight into him, right? It pins him to the ground, it keeps him from going out, it keeps him from recomposing guard. That's a beautiful objective if I want to keep him where he's at. However, what I want to do is make sure we get to the turtle position. So what I'm looking to do is to have my knee on the outside of his arm, preferably my knee attached to his shoulder. I'm gonna have my far leg kicked out so that it allows me to run with him because I know he's gonna move. If my knees are on the ground, it makes you slower. My outside hand's still gonna be blocking this hip to keep it from recomposing, and my head is still gonna be providing a crossface. A key detail of that crossface is, a crossface is not just your arm on the other side of his head. If Dave looks towards me, then Dave can move towards the direction that he can turn his face. That's gonna be an issue for me. A crossface should be a block of his ability to actually turn his head. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of the shoulder pressure, but it does have to serve the purpose of blocking him. So there must be a connection. So now when Dave tries to look towards me, he can't turn his chin. Good. Now, when we see that whole position from that 100 kilos, to free him up, it's gonna look like this, right? Dave tries to look towards me, he can't really. My hands are out, but he has the ability to kind of separate, push away from me, and roll into the turtle. It's gonna look like this. As he goes up, we're gonna keep a connection between his far side hip and his near side shoulder as he comes up. Now, reasons for that is I'll always have the ability to make sure he can't keep going as far and that his hand can't repost against me when he rolls back up. So as his hand starts to come backwards to maybe grab me, right hand, I can still kind of press and push him and manipulate his body. It's not just a free roll where I'm running after the guy and he recomposes on me. Now, as you're doing it, what I'm going to try to get to is a turtle control position. There's 3 points of control that we're looking for, but we want to get it in transition. That first one's going to be entry from my knee. So, as I get into that modified 100 kilos, he rolls up, I'm gripped towards him, and my knee comes up to the pocket of his hip. Now, what he's going to be trying to do is close this space off, if fundamentally correct, right? I like to say that there's a direct correlation between the elbow and knee connection and the amount of submissions that you're subject to, right? It's a key defensive principle. It's one that he's going to be looking for. However, because I want to get what I'm looking for, I'm going to have to separate this. So when I'm here, I'm going to ride my knee all the way through this gap and place not just my knee on the inside, but a good portion of my shin that separates his connection between his elbow and his knee. It's gonna look like this. So you can see this huge block right here. The issue is, for him to reconnect, he'd have to move his arm all the way around to get there, and I'm gonna be doing a whole lot to prevent that. This is one of the key positions of this. Now these other 2 points are to keep him from rolling out, escaping, and gaining momentum. I'm gonna use them both by taking my outside hand. I go over and I'm using a 5-finger grip, kind of like a monkey paw. Use that monkey paw and I'm flaring my elbow out, but more importantly, I'm turning his hand in. If we looked at his hand on a clock, this is 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or 9 o'clock. I wanna rotate him down somewhere between a 6 and 9 o'clock position. So I want to bend it in. Now, that has to go hand in hand with his head touching the ground. I do that by pressing my shoulder into the back of his shoulder and making his forehead touch the ground. I'm keeping my hand free from base. It keeps me from being off balance when we roll out. Okay, so let's see all that put together. As he rolls up, I'm going to maintain connection with that outside hip, that inside shoulder. As he comes up, I'm going to slide my knee in between that gap between his elbow and his knee. I'm going to take my outside hand, making sure that his arm is turned inside and forcing his head down to the ground. Right? We're looking for head and arm connection break, outside arm control, head control. It's going to look like this. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more work from here. Once we've earned the turtle control position, our partner is going to be trying to do everything he can to get out. A lot of these are predictable, right, of the ways that he's going to get out and the way that he's going to resist me. Along that way, with any good system, there are submissions that will force him to be more defensive and less concentrated on the escape. These have to be mixed in along the way to make this a credible attack system. So once again, I'm sliding into that turtle control position. I slid through. I'm separating that elbow from his knee. His hands flared. His head's pressed down to the ground. Now, the first attacks are the easiest attacks here. My hand going through underneath his chin is going to help me to make sure his hand concentrates on protecting his neck. Once again, there's a lot of debate about whether you should bait an opponent to an attack or actually go for the attack. My intentions are always to get you with the technique I'm trying on you right now. If you defend in a correct way, submissions are a gift. So if you're not willing to give me a gift, I'm going to offer you a different present, right? So from here on this, if his hands are separated from his neck, my hand is going to shimmy across right between his chin and his neck all the way to the other side of his body, touching on his shoulder. I'm going to get through that gap by making a smaller fist. So I'm not going to go through with my fingers straight out so he doesn't catch my fingers. And I'm not going to go through a fist because it makes such a huge area. I'm going to go through just a little bit of my first finger and my thumb connected together, and I'm going to come through the gap like this. My 4 fingers wrap around his shoulder, and what we do from here, if I do make this connection, I turn this into the flat choke. I call it a flat choke because we're not going to do anything else special. I'm just going to drive his body forward, and the pressure from my body forcing him down on my hand will induce a submission. It's very simple. It's the one to go for immediately to make him worry about this hand, right? Now, what this is going to induce as I go through here, if I go through here and I connect and I force him down and I get the choke, well, that's great. But sometimes as I'm coming through here, he's gonna turn his chin and start to block with that free hand that he has. So block with your free hand, right? He's gonna start trying to close up this gap with his hand. I can't get in there, and that's awesome. Because now his hand's on the outside of his body, and when we make our Peruvian entries, that's one less thing he has for protecting, right? So when he has his defenses up, my next move is to slide this knee forward, right? As I slide this knee forward, it starts to press his elbow out, right? See how there's an actual gap between his elbow and the floor? And I'm squeezing his head down to the ground, and now I'm in a perfect position to start doing the rest of the Peruvian. So what we're gonna be looking to get to is a Peruvian control position from that turtle control position. So let's recap some of that. Our opponent has already rolled into the turtle. We maintain control of his hip and his shoulder, slid down, separating his shoulder, his connection of his elbow and his knee. My hand was to the outside, 5-finger grip, turning his elbow inside, his head's pressed down to the ground. And to get rid of this, so I know what he's doing with his hand, I force him to do something with his hand by initiating an attack with this choke. I make the small surface area entry, I slide across, I get my 5 fingers to the other side, I force him down to the ground, choke him. Or he knows the gig's up. He's gonna block that area, and I'm gonna continually touching this. And so now that his hand's on the outside, he knows he can't get the choke, but he can't escape. Perfect time to enter into the Peruvian control position. Okay, so now we are going to start moving into what I call the Peruvian control position. So we've maneuvered into the turtle control position. We've initiated attacks from that turtle control position, right, to get our opponent into a defensive mindset. That's going to give us a little bit of a head start to actually open up our gi and enter into the Peruvian control position, right? So this is going to, small details here, but they make the most sense. You'll see that in a second. So when I slide in, separated his elbow from his knee, my hand's on the inside, flaring his elbow, his head's pressed down to the ground. I have his hand protecting his neck on the outside. That's gonna give me time to reach back and stick my hands inside my gi and open up my gi, right? I get it all the way out till I can actually see the skirt of the gi. The whole time I'm doing this, I have to maintain this pressure of my body forcing his head down. A mistake would be to release the pressure and I go here, and then he's gonna unwind this position. So I gotta stay heavy as I extract my gi. The basic entry into the Peruvian control position is holding the gi with my thumb on the outside, call it the hitchhiker entry, and I look over my opponent. Now, if I angle towards here, there's a little gap that's right here between his head and his whole arm, and I could actually stick my whole hand in there to connect. I'm gonna need that. The problem is, when I'm on this side of his body, I can't really see how big that hole is, but I know one exists, no matter how small he tries to get. So to cheat with that, I actually look over and I look into the gap that I want to get to. So as I take my hitchhiker thumb, I look to the gap and I stick it in. My outside hand is going to come through and connect. So if I get Dave to lift up, what it looks like from this other side is that my gi is going to come from the outside of his body and connect. See how my hands come to connect? I have thumb up. My thumb is going to be pointing towards the top of his head, right? I'm not going to catch the grip in any other way. Cool. Let's see that from the down position. I'm sliding here. I forced him down. I extract my gi, keeping the shoulder pressure. Thumb in. I look into the gap. I connect, and my hands are connected. Cool. From here, this position right here is going to be the Peruvian control position. Okay. From here, everything his chances of getting out of here start now, but they've diminished heavily. What you're going to see, he's way behind the gun. A lot of times the guy doesn't even know he's inside this position, which is an advantage to us. Okay. We want to make sure that this whole time going in, that this was a predictable gap. What led to my ability to actually enter in with that skirt was the attack that I provided with that flat choke, right? That flat choke being winded in through here allows you to connect that. And we'll see some different transitions a little bit later. Okay, so we've done a lot of work to get further along in the system. We've induced our partner to roll up to the turtle position. We've controlled him in that position from a very specific turtle control position. We've actually induced him to position himself to make him more susceptible to the choke that's coming. And then we've wrapped our gi around him and keeping a tight control of him, which we call the Peruvian control position. Now, we're going to do the namesake of this system. I'll actually show you how to do the Peruvian, and then we're going to start talking about all the different ways to recognize his defenses and our ability to stop it. So let's get down into that Peruvian control position. I've slid in between, separating his elbow and his knee, his hands furrowed out, his head's forced down to the ground. I've induced him to keep his hand on the outside. I've flared my gi open, keeping pressure with my chest to keep his head from coming up. I have the thumb in, I look inside the gap, I connect everything together. My hand is caught, so now that my right hand is free, the order of operations here is by all fans. You already have noticed a very particular theme here, that my ability to control his head controls his ability to escape, right? My ability to prevent at least 50% of the way that his head can move only offers him 50% of the escape, if that makes sense. So one of my primary issues here as I transition to the Peruvian is to make sure his head never comes off the ground. Cool. Now, it will be the difference between every other scramble that is possible from here if you perfect this motion. So when I'm inside a Peruvian control position, before I start to maneuver, I take my hand and I actually invert my palm so that it's placed behind. It makes a perfect fit right behind his skull, so my hand's right tied through. I have a little bit better elbow maneuver, right? It's a little bit better than going here where a little bit of tightness with the elbow doesn't allow you a lot of motion. That pressure with the head is going to allow me to step my feet up off the ground. Now, I'm able to move my right knee all the way over to the other side of his body. So my foot's actually going to step on the other side of his head. It's going to look like this. Now, from here, if I can keep his head still down, I will. As I step up with my left leg to get on the other side of his body. Now, I'm not in too much of a hurry, but I do like to do it slick. So when I come up, I'll have this issue of actually stepping my knee all the way around to his body and somehow staying connected with this lapel. So in order to cheat, I'm actually going to sit back at an angle as I throw my leg over. It's going to look like this. Cool. Now, what we're seeing is that my leg is loose on the back and I have one leg over his head. Now, I have a lot of control over his body. It's preventing him from raising his head up because my foot's on the outside. It's preventing him from jumping over me because my left leg's blocking his hips. So if we raise up so you can look up, you can see that my hand's still caught underneath him. And there's a lot of different configurations of how he'll defend this, but we'll come to that, okay? So let's do that entry one more time. You'll see me do it once more at a very slow speed as I kind of just talk out the little parts. You'll see me do a little bit more fluidly. Then we'll talk about how to finish it. So I enter in, I slide, I separate, I flare the arm, press the head, open the gi, thumb in, looking through the gap, connecting, hand down, pinning the head, stepping over with the foot, stepping over, falling back, and throwing my leg over the side. See it one more time. Nice and smooth this time. Separating, flaring, head pin. Opening the gi, looking through the gap, over. Pin the head, over the body, stepping, and together. Now, to finish this submission, there are several different progressions. The easiest progression that causes you no extra motion is to simply point your heel towards the other wall. By straightening out my leg, it forces his neck into the lapel, causing the choke. Depending on how strong he is, as I start to push, he may start to resist. I take my hand off the ground, I actually put my hand inside the lapel, I start to pull back straight out my chest. It adds another level of pressure. It is just the way things are that choke comes on so quickly that the first 2 seconds of resistance, if he tries to use a resistance, seconds 4 and 5 will probably be unconsciousness. It is a very quick choke. It is very unsuspecting. A lot of different things can happen. Right? So that is the Peruvian necktie. Okay, so we need to start talking about a little bit of the systematic approach to the Peruvian necktie. We have talked about a singular way of entry, correct? That we gave one way that would induce our opponent to roll to a turtle. We found a way to keep him in that turtle, a kind of a way to induce him to protect himself in a way that allows us to enter into our primary technique of the system, moving into the Peruvian necktie and stepping over. If life was always that easy, jiu-jitsu would be way easier, probably a little bit funner, but he's going to resist in certain ways, and these ways are predictable. That's what makes the system going. You knowing what the primary ways of defense are, what puts you ahead of a person. Reason is if I've prepared this in advance for months at a time. If you've never seen this position before, you're going to have to come up with the right answer to the predicament I've put you in a very short amount of time. If there's a depth to my answers, well, the chances of you coming up with the right answer to this pop quiz, they drop. So what we want to know is that one of the primary ways that our partner's going to resist is once I start to enter in to the Peruvian necktie, he's going to start to grab my hands, right? Hand fighting and grip fighting are a fundamental portion of jiu-jitsu. Your ability of knowing how you're going to prevent your grips from being stripped or how to complete the grips that you want is always going to be a constant battle. No different from here, okay? So I might angle you a little bit more. So I have an angle. So what's going to happen if I get him into turtle control position, my partner has a couple of different ways that he can protect himself. Now, if for whatever reason I don't use this action to force his hand over, his hand can actually come to the other side of his body and block. Cool. Or just by keeping his chin and his head turned out to the outside and keeping that hand on the outside to protect his neck, it keeps me from coming in here, and that's a great way to protect himself. Or so you would think, right? This is not a barrier to entry into the Peruvian. In fact, it just adds an extra choking element to when I wrap my lapel over. And so when I'm looking at this, if I get his head down, I still maintain the same dynamics by forcing his head down. I'm still looking through the gap. I look over the top. But what I'm looking to do now is actually shoot my hand over this gap, and I'm going to catch his hand inside of my gi. It's going to go here. So if you were to look up, you're going to see that his hand is actually stuck on the inside of this. This is going to be a nightmare decision for him in a second. Because right now, once my head's attached to him, when he tries to move his hand out, it's not going to help. When all the pressure of my body comes through, it's going to force him into his hand and on the outside. And that's going to be the choke. Okay? Let's see how that works out. I'm inside of position. He's blocking the outside. Even if I see a fist or a flat hand, I'm going to go over it and capture the outside meaty portion. So I don't want to just look through the gap. I want to actually get this hand. It's going to go like this. Boom. I go captured over. I stepped over. I'm here. I step in. And it's a nightmare. Great. So when he's down on the ground, we also have this ability that as I'm going on this outside, he's going to catch with his hand. It's also, I just know it's going to happen, right? It's already over there. If he sees this coming, he's going to reach up and try to grab this lapel. So he might be able to grab like this with his thumbs in, or he might end up grabbing underneath. See here? So he might end up with thumb down or thumb up on that position. Okay. Now, it could be deeper or less, but it's the forward extended hand that's our issue. So let's cover. If the thumb's up when I come over and for some reason he grabs this position, he's going to be trying to rip this away from him, which is going to kind of maneuver this off of his neck. What I'm looking to do here is to wrap my outside hand over on top of his hands. So it's going to look like this. Watch it again. He grabs, I'm over, I connect my hand, and my hand collapses his arm into his body. So now when he tries to extend his hand, the problem is he's running into the back of my forearm. So as he continues to pull, I press his body down, I pull more from the outside to feed more lapel through his hands, and then I step over his body and finish a choke. Now you notice that it was enough to induce a tap in motion almost immediately when I stepped over. The problem is because his hand's still being driven into his neck, and it's not enough to rip away, not with the weight of my body on top. So, see that one more time. All the variations from the front hand block. I slide in, I push out, his hand's on the other side of his body, I can't get it through. I'm gonna go over, I'll try to trap his hand in, but if I can't, and he grabs the lapel, I don't worry about it. I make sure I connect my hand underneath to the lapel. I take the outside of my arm and I press his hand into his neck. The reason why I'm doing this is so he can't rip out the gi. Rip. Right? If I don't protect with his hand and he tries to rip, he has a better grip over this and he'll be able to slide this over his head and it becomes an issue. Okay? I want to trap it inside. I step up, I press, and I fall back. Even though he has a grip on the gi, it's not going to be enough to stop the leg. It's not the grip step break or induce a choke, it's the stretching of the leg and the leaning back of my body, right? So there we go. Our initial defenses to the hand fighting from the Peruvian control position. Okay, so we've kind of gone over how we can fight through his initial resistance of getting that Peruvian control position. But the fight's not over depending on how crafty our opponent is or just the circumstances of my gi, the looseness, tiredness. There's a lot of things that could go in that everything doesn't go to plan that I immediately get into the Peruvian necktie and it goes through. One of the more common ways is for our opponent to roll away from us once we get into that Peruvian control position. Okay? So you're going to see Dave actually fall down on his side and we're going to be left over here. Okay? Now, what you have to understand is that this is a 360 degree applicable technique, right? As long as the dynamics happen that this lapel is wrapped around his body and my outside leg is over his head, the same dynamics that choke him when his back is towards the sky will choke him whether his back is towards the wall, his back is towards this wall, a little bit closer to me, and possibly him with his back towards the ground, which would cause my whole body to be underneath. Would never really happen. I don't know how that could, but these other three are definite possibilities that you're gonna face, and you just gotta know how to deal with them, okay? So we're gonna go through just getting into that Peruvian control position, and we're gonna watch him slide to the side. It's gonna look like this. So as I start to raise him down and start to slide his head in, Dave's gonna open up his right leg and he's gonna slide off to the side and we're gonna be caught in this position here. Cool. So we're gonna look at this from a couple of different directions, but this main part that we wanna make sure is that my feet are closer to Dave's head and I enter into what I call the clinch control position. So What's happening here is that you'll see there's a lot of room. You saw I just fell off of his head? There's so much room between there that he could even use his free hands and start to peel this off of his head because he's changed the angle. I gotta cinch this in. So as he falls down to the side, I take my outside hand and I wrap it around his head like this. So now when he tries to unwrap himself, it's tough. Cool? It's just hard to push it over his head. It's the first thing you have to go to. I'm not worrying about my legs. I have to make sure this lapel goes, or I'm gonna have to accept that now he's escaped the turtle control and back and side control. We work through the rest of our system. Let's watch that one more time. Wrap down into the cinch. Now, if you can see where the cinch is, my hand is keeping his elbow from getting back in front of my arm. Is the other part that comes in. If his elbow gets in front of my arm, then this starts to unwrap. There's no Peruvian from this position. Cool? This has to stay in front of our body. So when I clench him in, I'm clenching my elbows together, which even at this distance, I'm not pressing with my shoulder. When he tries to get his elbow out, it's tougher because my elbows are pressed together. That elbow press plus the connection of my chest to the outside of his tricep make it basically impossible for him to get that arm out. Good. Now, we're in the same position that we wore, and like I said, it's just 360 degrees, it's a reinterpretation of the motion. So to finish this, I'm actually gonna step over his head just like we did before, except I don't wanna make all the room, which is a common mistake in beginner jiu-jitsu, that we make a lot of room. By making this room, you saw how this opens up, this is where he's gonna spin out. That's gonna be a problem for us. So what I'm gonna do is shorten the distance that it takes to step over him. I'm gonna do that simply by landing on my shin. So when I'm from here, I'm gonna press his arm through and I'm gonna step over and I press with my shin. Now, I step over with my head and I can start to, I don't wanna lean back because his head's still underneath. From here, I start to extend my back and he's done. It's a weird gripping situation and everyone that gets caught by it is super surprised when it happens. Let's see how that goes down again. So see if we're in that front position again. I'm sliding into the turtle. I opened up, everything in life looks good. I get him connected and he falls through. First thing, clench, elbows together, chest in the back of his elbow. All this to keep him from peeling off the lapel and getting his elbow back in front of me. I press down with my head and I step, slide my shin to the ground. Nice. So I land and like protect myself with my arms so I just don't flop on the ground. Obviously, if I didn't have the space here, I'd flop on the ground and I'd lose that connection. I step one leg over and I don't fall back. I stretch my hips and I get the tap. Let's look at that from this angle. There we go. So, I slide in. I get that connection. He rolls to the side. Notice I'm getting that clinch. If you see from behind here, I can make a conscious decision of which direction I let my ankles go. And we'll cover this in a second. But when I get to this position, my partner, if my foot's out, there's a chance that he can wrap his right foot through, pull me into a guard. And that's gonna be an issue, only for a few seconds, okay? So we'll come back to that in a second. To beat that, if I'm smart enough and I do it right, I turn my foot towards my body. So even if you try to reach with his feet, he can't find the foot, right? So it's a free time. I have him in a clenched position, I press his head down, watch what happens. This slides all the way through, shin to the ground. I brace myself with my hand, I step over, and I stretch. Okay, so we've covered a few solutions to ways that our opponent's gonna intelligently defend himself. And this is just the basis of any system that you want to. As your jiu-jitsu grows, you're not training to defeat white belts. You're training to defeat black belts. It's the guy that's going to do it right the first time, every single time. Okay, and it's something that we're going to watch to here. So after you've had any type of success with Peruvian, even if it wasn't successful, you've already telegraphed it, but you missed a move because you did something out of order. He's going to defend that connection of the lapel with his life, right? He's going to catch it with two hands. He's going to do everything he needs to do. So when I get inside, there's a high possibility that if he's strong enough, he has enough base, when I come across, he grabs this lapel and he gets even two hands on it, and I can't even connect. And what this is going to allow him to do is to push this over his head. Now, this could be a problem, but I like to call this an Amar Akbar, right? It's a trap. So as his hand comes out, he's stuck to this lapel, right? Because he's obviously doesn't want it around his neck. The problem is that now he's made a lot of distance between his hand and his head where it should be protected. I take my hand, I put it over his hand, and I slide my foot over the top. He may release that grip or he may not. It's not going to help him too much as I flatten my legs backwards to put him into that crucifix. Now, from this crucifix control, there's a whole entry into crucifix positions, and that's a lesson for a different time. What I'm going to do is to reinitiate myself into the Peruvian system. So I'm going to re-free my arm, and now he has half of the defenses that he had originally. When I connect my arm together and I go through, I press his head down, and my foot's just going to unwind for where it is on his leg. Even if he tries to grab that leg as it goes through, it's enough to still connect him. Cool? Because I don't need it to be straightened out. I keep his hand over, I step out, and we choke. Let's watch it one more time. I'm over. He defends with both hands and gets grips on this. I can't pull him up. Part of the reason why this succeeds is not that I start to rotate my head so much that as he rotates this over his head and lifts his head up at the same time, I lose a whole position. When this is got, I have to maintain the head position. So as David keeps trying to get up, I'm pressing down with my shoulder, my chest on top of his shoulder, pressing down to the ground. So as he rotates this over his head, I grab his hand, I step over, and I peel his arm back into the crucifix. Retrieve my lapel, reset it, put it over his neck, connect, hand down. I'm not worried about grabbing on the outside of the leg because it just needs to go over his head. I step, and I'm over his body. Nice. That's the Amar Akbar. This is a trap variation. There you go. So now we're moving down the rest of those variations of how my opponent is intelligently defending himself, and I gotta be a step ahead. So one of the things I'm gonna run into is once we get inside this turtle position, he may be in such a perfect ball that this is so tight or his hands are so tight that there's no way I'm getting into there, right? It's gonna be a little bit counterproductive for me to get our jiu-jitsu going if I just pin him into this position, don't let him go. The only other option is to switch and maybe start trying to do a back take or pull him back down into side control, but we can also offer them, right? Submissions are a gift, but sometimes to get a gift, you have to offer a gift in return. So what I'm gonna do is, because I can't get my knee here, I'm gonna pull out my lapel before we get there, and I'm gonna rotate my body to offer him a single leg. Right? It's gonna look like this, and we'll see it from a different position in just a second. My knee's down on the ground, my legs posted out. Cool. Let's see that from this other angle here. So when I'm here, he's all locked up. I open the guard, and I'm gonna rotate in position and offer my hand out like this. So I'm giving him this knee for him to grab. Okay. So now, whatever side I go into, the knee, the side that's closest to him, is going to be the knee that's on the ground. What I don't want is to have one foot down, because if he does actually get control of this knee, grab it with both hands, he's going to pressure forward and trap me on the ground. Reason why this is actual viable option is because now when I'm out on this side, I'm pressing, if he gets both hands around his leg and he presses forward, I actually can base out with this and not hit the ground, okay? So it's gonna be a trap. I need him to grab that leg. I really want him to, okay? So when we go back around, I pull out, the second that hand comes out to grab this leg, it opens up a space for me to connect. So there's a problem here. So now, what I don't want him to do is to stand up and dump me on the ground. This could be a problem. So you saw how he was able to project his butt inside the air and push me backwards. I'm gonna defeat that by taking my hand and pressing his head down and stretching my hips down to the ground. So as he tries to pull forward, I stretch and his head stuck to the ground. Now, I'm going to simply step over his head, step back, and have him enjoy the ride. Now, this goes hand in hand with something I call the bulldog bump. So we could be inside of a position where my opponent is staying super tight. I get inside and he starts trying to stand up. Right? See like how he's going to press down and start to lift his head up. And I'm having trouble, either my shoulder slid off of his body or my chest slid off, the connection to this near shoulder that's keeping him down. I call this the bulldog bump. As he starts to press up, I bulldog bump him towards the angle where my body is. See how his head hit the ground as he goes through? It'll put his butt in the air. Cool. Watch it again. Just back up a little. So I slide through, my opponent starts to get up, bulldog bump him this direction, and I'm gonna slide back in. Now we're inside the same areas. If his hands are separated from his body, I can still come back around. If he tightens back up, I can't get back in there, I slide around. I'm waiting for that arm to touch me. The second that arm touches me, I know there's a gap. My hand goes down, I press his head down, and I stretch my hips down to the ground. From here, I step back, and what I'm gonna wanna do is get this knee to the outside of that arm when we go through, right? I don't wanna just stretch backwards. So grab that leg. I don't wanna stretch backwards and step right back into it. Because maybe he gets a better angle on stuff and can actually finish this control. And now we're kind of stuck. So when I step backwards, my knee is gonna come to the outside, just like we were doing before, pressing his elbow and his knee apart, right? We're just saying there's a direct correlation between his ability to be submitted and the connection between his elbow and his knee. Press down his head, I'm over the top. Give him a press. Okay, so be remiss if we don't look into ways that the no-gi Peruvian can actually work into here, right? Especially when our opponent, most of what you're going to see is intelligent defenses are going to be defeating this gi if he's unable to defeat the actual turtle escape position, right? So when he's inside of this turtle control, our opponent may, if you're looking up here, he might get both of his hands inside of the gi, underneath his body, right? And I won't be able to pull through because he's going to have so much pressure. Me actually falling loose, I'll actually separate and rip the gi out of my controlling hand that's underneath. That's not what I'm going to be looking for. So what we're going to see is that I'm going to take from my gi position, I'm going to reach over and grab my wrist with the free hand and release the gi. If his hands are still attached to the gi, his hands are occupied and aren't able for him to defend himself. And we're going to use this grip to actually choke him. It's going to look like this from that Peruvian control position. I go through. He puts both his hands inside the lapel. All right, lift up. See, he's in there. That's going to be an issue. I'm going to reach over, and I'm just doing this towards the camera. There's going to be a little bit more when I do some more of the demonstrations underneath him. I'm reaching over, and I'm putting 5 fingers over that wrist. So the backhand, 5 fingers over the wrist, and I'm looking over the top. So my body's still positioned over the top. Also the most important part, if I let his head come off the ground and he's here, he can grab the outside leg and start to dump me over. I have to keep his head on the ground. So now when he tries to stand up, it's hard. I'm actually pressing down. I'm using a lot of that shoulder rotation pressure, a little bit of my arm, and really pressing him down into the ground. So we're gonna do the same step overs. So there's 2 different ways that I find useful to finishing this. I step over with both feet and sit down. So it's gonna be an actual almost full stand-up position. So one of the, there's a way that you're gonna find success with this, and there's gonna be a way that you're gonna find a lot of weird variation. And that is always gonna be dependent on which foot steps over first. So if I rotate my knees, right, I stand up and I step my leg over, I'm already in a position to kind of fall backwards from the traditional way that we're used to. The problem is that I won't have all that room to lean back. And so my left leg that's in the back has to get over his hips. To do that, I lean over and I lock. And my hands are gonna come up. So I'm falling back so you can see my hands. So I have my hands slid down to my hand. The same actions that choked him before will do it here. I'm not pulling with these hands. I'm stretching with my leg to force him into the choke. This next demonstration, you're not going to see him roll up. He's going to be stuck kind of low and getting choked. Right? Like this. Slide in. He wraps both his hands in there. That's not a problem. I get both of my wrists together. I step over. I'm up in the air. As I step over, I'm going to rock back and I'm going to stretch my leg. It is super interesting to be caught in. So now let's talk about that second variation. Now, there's a way that you end up having a hard trouble standing up and getting over the person. Actually having certain angles with people, or some guys are just wider partners. So when I step in here, instead of stepping over with that rear foot, I'm still gonna go here. If I feel both hands, I can't get these together, I wrap my hands together, I step my leg over, but this time I'm gonna sit back. So I'm gonna open up my knee, just to make sure that my knee's on the outside of his body, and when I step back, he's gonna roll over to his side a little bit. I'm taking my foot, and I'm pressing into his calf, if you can see here, right? So I'm gonna be pushing him away. When my hands are reunited against him, it's gonna make it so that his body can't jump over. So now when he's stuck inside this position, it is the same setup, right? We talked about if his body is that way or towards me, I always finish it by stretching my leg to finish the choke, okay? Now, it comes in several different ways, right? Some of these, especially with the no-gi, there's a high chance that you're gonna get a little bit of a cranking action from those. It's gonna vary in mileage because of different ways our bodies come together. The cleanest of all those is gonna be the lapel choke. The lapel choke is gonna give you the most. So that's our coverage of actually getting into our opponent. He defends everything, and we're able to get into that no-gi variation of Peruvian. So what I want to give you is some drills to progress your skills in here. There are actual benefits to doing a technique all the way out every single time, right? Getting those reps inside a position. But where jiu-jitsu starts to reach itself at a higher level, when you start to express it, not just by grips and movement, it's about time and in space. And above that time and in space, it's a game of transitions, right? Jiu-jitsu is played in between those moments, right? That's when you start getting to that advanced level. So the more entering into your techniques, wherever you have to do, as a person's turning is what's gonna help you. So the first drill that's worth getting a partner with and practicing is actually getting to that modified 100 kilos, right? To actually entering into turtle control and getting control of that lapel, right? You can stop that drill there. You can still finish the turtle, right? You can go the actual Peruvian, but what you're looking to do is my ability to stay connected and stay fresh with him, stay actually aligned with the energy and the speed that it goes out. I'm gonna try to get my partner not to go that fast at first so I can actually move with him and so I'm not being separated. We're gonna look at what that drill should look like, and we're gonna look at what it shouldn't, right? Where you're actually missing your ability to control time and space. So this is what's a good portion of this drill. Here, he's rolling out, and I'm in a position. Cool, nice and smooth. My body wasn't in step action, okay? Now that's the best way to be. What we're gonna start to notice is that as you move into being able to blend your techniques, it may look like this. This still isn't bad, but it's not where you wanna be. And that's the step action demonstration. It's gonna look like this. Cool. Now, did I do all the steps correctly? Of course I did, right? But the problem is what we're going through is time and space. How much time did it take me to do that? How much space did I need for him to offer me for me to get inside those motions? And that's gonna be the difference between you hitting that with somebody at a lower level and a higher level, okay? So let's look at a different drill turnout that you can actually apply. He's gonna be on his side. So we can also enter into these positions from actually being on knee on belly, right? Your body's gonna be a little bit up. We can practice our partner turn it out and turn it in. Let's take a look at it turning out first. So I have knee on belly here. Now watch this correction to knee on belly. I'm not actually holding him down, and my feet have actually come off of his body. We're actually offering the same dilemma or the same door out that we were originally. All I'm doing is making sure his foot doesn't come back this way, and I have a hand that's actually lifting his shoulder off the ground to keep him, hopefully, from turning this way. So when he tries to turn that way, it's less comfortable. When he'd be more comfortable rolling that way, yay! And I get him. So, number two is a more combative way. The second way. A lot of guys, if he's doing it properly, he's gonna try to get that elbow on the inside of his body and maybe turtling up. From that turtle position, I can rotate down to a sprawling position in front, rotate back. Now, I have the two options here. Once he gets up, I can either rotate back into a turtle control position or try to initiate into a Peruvian, depending on what I think that flare is gonna look like. So this is what it looks like him turning in. I turn back, and I'm back into the position. Notice that I'm immediately flipping my lapel into my hand. I'm looking into that gap, I'm looking to get it. Cool. As a conclusion to getting all those pieces together, you're gonna want to play each little variation out has a transition. Right? So that was at entries into those turtle controls, but you could just as easily work that has your transitions into going to the crucifix position, your entries to when your partner turns out, your entries to when he grabs your lapel, and your ability to switch hands and still maintain control to get in that first step up. You can get a lot of rep by practicing what it takes to get to that first step of a technique, right? If you've drilled it enough and you have a good understanding of what needs to come after, basically the things that separates you from the next person is your ability to actually get to that technique. And doing drills like this are actually gonna help out. All right, so that's the conclusion of this tutorial. I hope you guys had a good time. I want to take a little time to recap some of the more fundamental concepts. Very much concept driven when I teach, and the things that you need to be able to walk away from. Obviously, trying to digest every single step of these is going to take time, notes, trial and error. The concepts that you need to remember are as follows. Number one, in order to get to that position, we have to create a path for our partner to get to, right? I call this concept submission as a gift, right? If you want to get to the turtle position, there's got to be a way for that person to move out of side control. And it's a choice that you got to make. You have to be looser in knee on belly, you have to be looser in side control. And there's definitely a risk to that, right? We mitigate that risk by controlling our partner in these key areas. And these are the ones that conceptually you need to control, because it's the things that we control this whole time. My ability to control the inside hip keeps my partner from ever recomposing, whether he's on his back or on his knees. My control of his ability to move his head keeps his ability from scrambling and drops it at a way lower level than what is possible, right? Every single time I'm moving in positions, I'm always checking to make sure I have head control, right? We maintain elbow and head control this whole time, we're gonna have an advantage. Good. Now, when we got to the turtle, we talked about a key concept that needs to stay in you, and this is that third concept, is that correlation between elbow and knee. Now, that elbow and knee being a direct correlation to how often somebody gets submitted. Now, I'll tell you that from an armbar perspective, from you getting kneed, everything happens, and usually when the elbow and knee are super far away. Now, I'm the guy that wants to take advantage of this. So I want this gap to be as large as possible. If he's trying not to get submitted, he's gonna try to make this as minuscule, if not non-existent as possible, right? We must win this battle. It's just the way it goes. If I want to make sure I have submissions to play with, whether they be the crucifixes, whether it be the hand and arm, and there's several other great techniques that can come from here, right? It's going to have a direct correlation for my ability to keep this arm exposed, his ability to make himself less defensible. That fourth concept that we're going through is that the choke does not come from the pulling, right? Neither should any choke that you do. If you really think about it, if you're using your jiu-jitsu the correct way, you should be applying your body, not your hands. So we noticed when we got to that Peruvian necktie, the choke doesn't come from, I'm gonna get to the position here, the choke doesn't come from me pulling my hands backwards. It came from straightening my leg out, right? I'm using the structure of the way our bodies are together, right? And going through. And now let's take back a look at that concept number 2 that we're using. Look at the control of his inside hip, the control of his head, right? It's at every single part of this, right? It's a fundamental concept, but when any of these concepts aren't used in conjunction, all 4 of them, you're gonna start to have breaks inside of the action. With those 4 concepts going through, right, you have the basis of what the fundamental concepts of this system they're built on, and if anything that you find that you can add on to it, it should not be a violation of those 4 concepts, right? The reason for that being is that if it doesn't violate any of the other 4 concepts, and we were talking about it a little bit before, is that I'll try anything, right? As long as it doesn't take away my ability to do all the things I'm meant to do from that position, right? So it's a amenable add. You can add arm bars onto there, you can add in chokes, but I want to do one that doesn't violate any of the concepts that this whole system was built on, or when I chase one of those other submissions, if I miss it, I can't get back to everything that we just covered today. Right? So you can live in this system if you concentrate on those 4 concepts. And thank you very much.
Thank you.